Hello, I'm Liz Zorab of Byther. Welcome to my podcast, Gardening Demystified. Today I'm talking to Victoria Drake from Your Groceries.
This is a By the Farm podcast.
Victoria lives in a part of the world I'm very familiar with. Victoria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Victoria Drake. I run Your Groceries, both the channel and the business, and I live in sunny Lancashire, which is mostly underwater at the moment. Thank you so much for having me on the channel.
You're very welcome. How are the floods doing up there? Are you still very flooded?
To be fair, it's not actually too bad now. We did have a couple of really bad weeks during the various storms that we had. Now it's mostly windy, as opposed to too rainy. But yeah, we just had such a wet summer last year, and it's just been a wet, soggy, miserable autumn and winter. I feel like I've seen nothing but rain, so I'm very ready for hopefully some sun this year. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Have you started your sowing of seeds for the year yet?
I have. Do you want to see some of them?
Yeah.
I have my tomato seedlings and my peppers. So I'm gonna actually put my laptop so you can see these from the side. I have these beautiful tomatoes that were sown only literally a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really pleased with these, and they've started to smell like tomatoes as well, which I know they do from when they get up, but I've been trying not to squish their leaves too much to get that delicious tomato smell off of them. But I've got it's like the best thing ever is when you start getting those tomatoes. And in here, these are the amazing container-wise seed starting trays, which are just incredible. I love these, and I've got kind of a little bit of a secret maybe about them, but I can tell you about that later. But yes, I've got one.
Are these ones made from recycled plastics?
Yeah, they're made from recycled plastic. They've got a really big hole at the bottom, which makes them ideal for kind of pushing the seedlings out of, and they're really sturdy, whereas the ones that you kind of get from the garden centre are so flimsy that they hardly last a season, whereas these ones are super hard wearing, and you know, I can see these lasting for years and years and years, and then they're recyclable again, so it's kind of all a bit circle of life. And I've got peppers in another one. Yeah, so these are really brilliant. I highly recommend these. They are a really good seed tray.
And obviously anything we talk about today, I'll leave links for in the description.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about your YouTube channel first, Victoria. How long has it been going? What sort of thing do you have on it? What do you do on it?
So on my YouTube channel, I really try to get the novice grower, so someone who may never have even planted a seed in their entire life before, inspired to grow, and I want to show them how easy it is to grow with the right techniques. You know, I think a lot of people, when they think of gardening, they still very much think of, you know, old men in straw hats shoveling mounds and mounds and mounds of dirt, breaking their backs, and it's miserable, and it puts a lot of people off. And so my kind of whole goal of the channel, it's a lofty goal, but I'd like to have every family in the UK growing something of what they eat. That's kind of the goal, and so it's a big one. But so that's kind of what I'm aiming to do. Now, I started the channel sometime last year. I'm really not entirely sure when I put my first video out. I've struggled with consistency just because I do a lot of different stuff. I have the business, I have a part-time job, and then the channel as well. So I must get better at being consistent. But yeah, the whole goal of the content is it's very educational. I would like to get into slightly more vloggy style content as time goes on, but I think that the most important thing is the education first and foremost, making it simple, taking out that garden jargon, and you know, speaking as if though I were to my best friend who's told me to explain everything as if as though I'm explaining it to a Labrador, and that's kind of the tact I try to take, because I remember, you know, when I first started gardening, and I don't know about you, Liz, I remember we spoke quite some time ago about when you first started gardening, but when I first started gardening, you know, it was so overwhelming because there were all these big words, and you know, there was things like sow in mid-spring. Well, when the hell is mid-spring? You know, you look at a calendar and you think, well, surely that can't be mid-spring. You know, we think of spring from January. And so there were all these things that I had to get my head around, and it was so overwhelming. And so I just want to take that away from people and make it very, very simple and very, very easy, and remind them that plants want to grow. you know, and that actually there's not that much to it. So yeah, that's a very rambling explanation of what I do.
You mentioned just then about your time being divided between creating videos and your business and your work. So what's your business? What is it that your business does?
Okay, so the business is very new. The business is called Grow Your Groceries, just like the channel. And I started out because I knew that I wanted land. I knew that I wanted to grow food. I grew up like that. To me, going out and picking a vegetable is far more natural than going down to the supermarket. And so I have always wanted to give other people that experience. And originally I was going to, do this fabulous retreat and it was going to be amazing. And then I got made homeless and that sort of evaporated rather fast. So when I started off the business, I just bought a house with a tiny little garden, and I thought, right, well, I may not be on the massive farm that I really want to have, but I can still teach people from where I'm at and heal people and teach them how to heal themselves, through nature and through plants and all that kind of stuff. So I went to a networking event and I said, right, well, this is who I am, this is my experience. And, I had this interest in permaculture. I did about half of a permaculture course. I was ill at the time, but I'd read loads and loads and loads and loads for years and been researching. So I thought, right, well, I reckon I could have a crack at this edible landscape design lark. I'd done it at a previous partner's address. I'd done it at an allotment. And I'd done it for friends. So I thought, right, it's time to start somewhere. So at the end of that networking event, I had a queue of people out the door wanting to talk to me, which had never happened before in any of my previous businesses. So I thought, right, well, I better come up with a product then. So the first thing that I sold was edible landscape design. So I'd do a consultation, and I still do. So I do a consultation, I'd go to someone's house, have a look at the land, have a chat to them about their needs, and then if they wanted to, at the time I would give them advice so that they could go away and then do what they needed to themselves, or I would go away and do an edible landscape design for them. So everything looks pretty, but it all just happens to be edible. Yeah. And the thing that I found was I was turning up to these people's houses, and they were usually kind of mums who are working and often with, some kind of a side business and little kids, and they'd go, right, I want a veg patch.
Yeah. And
I'd be like, right, well, you probably don't need a consultation for a veg patch. Lovely though it is that you've asked me to come here, or you've paid me to come here, I think that it would be wrong of me to consult with you to do a veg patch. So I had to kind of come up with this product, and so I worked with my very first clients around, okay, what do you actually want? What are your restrictions? And, they've become my very best friends. And so over the last year, I approached the local government and I got some funding. And so I've been doing research and development, and I've come up with something called the Insta garden.
Right.
So I still do my edible landscape designs, but they're very much kind of perennial sort of landscapes and a bit more expensive, but longer lasting. But what these people wanted was veg patches, and they wanted something quick and easy. They didn't want to do DIY because half of them didn't know, one end of the hammer to the other, or they just simply didn't have the time to be doing it. Well, yeah, exactly, and me too. I mean, if you've seen my Instagram, you've seen how many injuries I've given myself trying to build a raised bed. It's actually ridiculous. Every single raised bed I've built, I've given myself an injury from. So I thought, right, well, this isn't going to do. If I try to tell people who are busy with kids, the average Joe, they might want to grow their own food, but for heaven's sake, when you start looking at, what kind of a wood can I build a raised bed out of? Well, make sure that it's not this kind of treated, and make sure it's not that kind of treated, and this wood rots where, people don't have the time to do that. And then, heaven forbid, you come to compost and researching compost or seeds. So I thought, right, I need to make this really simple. So the Insta garden kind of does what it says on the tin. It's an instant vegetable garden.
Right.
So it's for the time poor parent generally, and it's a veg patch delivered to your front door. So you get raised beds which are reclaimed from the shipping industry, and they come ready built, so there's no DIY needed. They can go on either concrete or into grass or soil. They come with a Which Best Buy peat-free compost, which is the Silver Grow multi-purpose compost, which is fantastic because it's a really nutrient-rich compost, but it also releases its nutrients very slowly, so it's also a really great seed starting compost. Yep. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with it. So you get enough to fill between 1 and 4 raised beds. You can choose how many they are, and obviously it's more cost efficient to do 4 than 1, but some people have less space. And then you also get one of the container, well, depending on how many beds, the container wise growing, in fact I have one here, seed starting trays. So it's a really lovely sturdy tray. I tried with everything to find the most eco-friendly possible, cost-efficient option. And so a lot of research went into trying to get both of those. But as you can see, these are super duper strong. And I believe that Charles Dowding recommends them. So, that's good enough for me. It comes with some of those, a couple of these Teiku pots, which I think I have one behind me. For the bigger seeds, like your courgettes, your tomatoes. And these are, again, fairly hard-wearing, but, these probably aren't quite as hard-wearing as the container-wise, but they were the best that I could get for the price. And then you get a selection of seeds, so between 5 and 15 seeds, plus an A5 growing sheet for every single seed of how to grow it, step by step, super simple, no garden jargon. And you get an artist's impression of what your garden's going to look like month by month to get the most out of the space. And you get a week by week, month by month calendar of what to do, broken down into super simple, easy steps, plus video tutorials to walk you through every single step of the way. So I've tried to really make it super easy, but the beauty of it is that within 10 minutes of it arriving at your front door, you can have it set up and be sowing your first seed.
Wow.
And that's what I really wanted, I really wanted something quick, simple and easy for your average person to pick up and start growing.
Amazing.
Thank you. I tried.
It's a really good idea. So you've done the edible landscape stuff. Is your entire background in horticulture, or was that a love that you had that you've then made into a business?
It was definitely a love that I had that I made into a business. So, like I mentioned earlier, I grew up on a small holding here in the UK, which for your American viewers is the sort of English version of a homestead. So I grew up on 1.5 acres, but my parents also have a couple of woodlands that they own for firewood, and my dad now does woodworking, although he started out as an electrician. And they also have a property in the Czech Republic that's about 20 acres, on top of a near vertical hill with woodland and pastureland and all that kind of stuff. So I very much grew up with that being the norm. But yeah, I sort of didn't realise how privileged I was, if I'm perfectly honest. My dad really tried to push me to get a vocation, and I pushed back really hard. So when I finished my A-levels, I came up to Preston to study police and criminal investigation at UCLan, which, I loved. I really enjoyed it, and I thought I was going to love the
so
city
just
life.
explain what UCLan is.
Oh, so UCLan, is the University of Central Lancashire. So it's a big university here in Preston, and it was one of the best universities to go to for policing. I had my heart set on becoming a detective, and catching murderers and all that. And having done it, I can tell you that it's not as much fun as it's made out to be. It's an awful lot of paperwork and spreadsheets.
So, and for the older listeners, I'll just let you know that UCLan used to be called Preston Polytechnic, and I know it well because I went there when it was still a polytechnic.
You did. We had this amazing conversation when Liz and I first spoke. Well, we kind of started talking just about YouTubing, and all of a sudden it turned out that you'd lived on the street next to where I'd lived in Chorley, I think, and that we'd gone to the same university/college. It was a bit of a wow, what a small world.
Yeah, absolutely, what a small world. Yeah,
it was crazy.
So,
but I absolutely.
You decided not to go into that investigative work.
Well, I actually did. So I was a very diligent student. It wasn't sort of your average go out 5 times a week and blow all your money kind of a person. I sort of squandered my younger teenage years. No. So I was very determined. I was going to university, and if I was going to university, I was going to get a job out of it, and it was going to be a blue and good one.
Right.
So whilst I was at university, was a special constable with the Greater Manchester Police, and learnt some very, very valuable life lessons there. Really enjoyed my time with them. It was a fantastic experience. Did some work with the British Transport Police as well, and then straight out of university, I landed what was supposed to be the end of my 15-year career plan job, which was with the National Crime Agency as an investigator. At the time, I was dating a guy who lived in Chorley and going up and down the M6 motorway on a weekly/bi-weekly basis.
It's
which was
tough
taking
going.
a massive toll.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was taking a huge toll on my body, and I'd researched so much about health and wellness when I was at university, and I'd done bodybuilding and I was so fit and healthy, and it just all went out the window because I just couldn't keep up with this job. I'd drive back down from the M6 on a Sunday night, get home, drop my bags, and get a phone call from work saying, oh, by the way, we're doing a warrant and we need you to come and search the house. And you'd be like, oh, for God's sake, I've just driven 5 hours. But it was just, that was that, and off you toddled, and you sort of did your bit. But the job was really, really tough. So in order to be able to get the move up north, I had to, I thought I had to do. In fact, it turned out in the end I didn't have to do it. But I thought I was going to have to deal with some really sensitive material. And so, being young, dumb, in love, you know what it's like, I signed myself up. And if I'm perfectly honest, it's been something that's really formed me as a person, but it also broke me a little bit as a person. And as a result of kind of dealing with that, I did get the move, but I also ended up having to take 6 months off work.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst I was off work, I mean, for the first couple of months, I could just about make it from bed to the sofa. It was pretty dreadful. But after that point, I started really noticing what it was that I was doing to keep myself happy. And the only thing that I had the energy to do was to draw out my allotment plan and then photocopy it about 24 times because I knew I was going to redo it. And then each photocopy I put a month on, so January, February, March, April, May, etc., etc., and I drew out my garden plan by hand and then coloured it in with coloured pencils, brassicas were one colour, everything, and I just drew it over and over and over again, and that was sort of what healed me, was just redrawing my allotment like so many times. And at that point I sort of realised the healing power of growing things, and I just sort of had a series of aha moments, about how broken the work systems are in this country and in a lot of countries, I think, in the Western world. Some aha moments about how many other people were going through what I was going through, because I'd met a lot of people at this point who were in a similar situation, and it sort of all happened at once, the Western diet and the Western approach to exercise, and how we live, how our communities are set up, how our jobs are set up, everything sort of piled into my head at once, and sort of these links were being made all over the place. It was like in a movie, where you see the neurons rushing from one end to the other end, and it's like bing bing bing, and that was sort of what it was like, and I thought, God, how many people don't know about this, and so I'd always been interested in growing. That was why I had the allotment and why I'd completely rescaped my boyfriend at the time's back garden, and built a pizza oven from scratch and all these things. And I just thought, no, this is far too important. I can't sit on this, and I'm never going to make the amount of money to enable this dream working the job that I'm working. It wasn't terrible money, but I just knew I couldn't do it, and I wouldn't be able to do what I needed to do. So I made the decision that I was going to hand in my notice. And so I came back to work, and the first thing that I did was walk up to the boss's desk and hand in my notice. He said, is this your doctor's note? And I said, no sir, that's my resignation. And I wish I could have photographed the look on his face. And so I left with this sort of beautiful idea in my head of what was going to happen, and then of course at that point I got made homeless.
So how long ago was this?
So this was about 2.5 years ago at this
So
point.
you have turned things around really quite quickly.
Yeah. I just sort of put my head down and dug my heels in and thought, no, this isn't, my parents kept saying, come back down south, we'll look after you and all this. And I thought, no, I've worked too hard. I've built business connections, because during the short period between leaving my job and being made homeless, I'd really networked my little heart out, and I'd started working with a really amazing business lady who was teaching me lots of good stuff about business. And I just thought, no, I can't leave here. I've got a job to do, and I know that if I go home, I'm going to fall in this little well of self-pity. I mean, not that I wasn't in one anyway, but a bigger one. And that will be that. I'd seen so many people get stuck, so I just dug my heels in, and it was really tough. I lived with a pair of priests for a couple of months. That was fun. Pair of Catholic priests living with a atheist girl went down really well.
You do what you have to do, and do you know what? They open their doors to you.
Absolutely, and they were absolutely fantastic. I'm still really good friends with them, and they were brilliant. I then got a flat because they had to move, and so I had to kind of pull all of my few pennies that I had together to buy this flat, or to rent this flat. Rented this awful flat, absolutely awful. No garden, hardly any windows, freezing in the winter, boiling in the summer. You know the sort, with mould on the ceilings and all that. And I was there for almost a year, and I thought, God, I can't grow veg, and it broke my heart. It really did. And I knew that I could have done a couple of crest bowls on the window, or set up some grow lights, but I didn't have money for grow lights. At this point I was scrabbling around under the bed because I didn't have a sofa, looking for 20p pieces, and when I found them, it was like, quick, run to the shop and buy a bar of chocolate, because this is amazing. There were days when I couldn't afford milk, genuinely.
Yes. Victoria, no, completely understand this, completely, and everybody else at some point goes through an incredibly rough patch. Well, I say everybody. It's always going to be relative, but I think everybody goes through difficult times.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that this whole experience has taught me, is that I'm definitely not the only person who's gone through it. So I mean, that was really tough, and I was trying to learn about business, and I'd started a coaching business at that point, which is what I call my desperation business, because it really wasn't what I should have been doing. I was doing it to try and save up the money to get a small holding, which it was a bit silly at the time, but whatever, you kind of do what you think's best at the time. And so as soon as we got this house, and I really pushed to get a house, because I'd met my now boyfriend by this point, I pushed and I pushed and I pushed, and God help the poor lad, because all I wanted was a big kitchen and a garden. And that was all I was interested in a house. So we ended up in this neighbourhood, which is not the worst neighbourhood in Lancashire.
It's not. It's a nice place. It's a nice area. Yeah,
it's an all right area. Ex-council house. Relatively reasonable garden. Not the acres that I grew up with. So to me, it's a small garden, but it's a reasonable garden. And I just thought, right, well, now I've got the space, now I can teach people. I can practice what I preach and show people what I'm trying to tell them, because I could have made YouTube videos, but it would have been me sat in my kitchen with no plants around me telling people how to grow plants. It would have been a little bit daft.
So do you also have an allotment?
No, I don't. So I used to have an allotment back when I moved up north from Essex. Right. But unfortunately, when I was made homeless by my previous partner, I was able I paid £100 to manage to keep the allotment, and then that year, obviously, not being able to buy milk, I definitely couldn't afford petrol to drive from where I lived to where the allotment was, so it just sort of fell into disarray, and by the time I came back it was a jungle, and I just couldn't keep it up. So
can we, for the benefit of listeners who don't know what an allotment is, can we try and explain, or could you try and explain the allotment system?
Yeah, okay, so my understanding of the allotment system is that it was developed during one of the world wars. Don't quote me on which one it was, I'm not entirely sure, but during one of the world wars, and the idea was that a single full-size allotment, and allotments are measured in rods, which is the most frustrating thing to get your head around, but a 10 rod allotment, which is a full-size allotment, and that's roughly, I think, 20 by 20 metres, something like that, 10 by 20, I'm not entirely sure. It's quite a large piece of land, but the idea was that intensively farmed, that area could produce all the food that a family of 4 would need for a year, if they cultivated it correctly.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the way that the government encouraged people to grow in order to help with, rationing and all this sort of stuff, and the fact that we weren't able to get food in from abroad necessarily. So as far as I understand it, they set it up so as that nobody could sell food from an allotment, so as that organisations wouldn't buy that land and then try and grow food to sell. So it's a very quintessentially English thing, I think. It's beautiful. And so the allotment that we had was 5 rods, so I believe it was 9 metres wide and 20 metres long-ish. So it was a half plot. So you can get half plots, quarter plots, full plots, double plots.
Yep.
And so that's what an allotment is.
And it's usually you'll have a group of allotments together, won't you? You don't often find a single allotment somewhere, so there'll be a group of allotments, and quite often
and they're normally run by the county. Right,
by the county. There are some private ones. I've come across a few private allotment. Yeah, I've been amazed, but yes, there are some that are private allotments, and usually they then have shared facilities. So water is piped into a certain place, or it's not. And every allotment site seems to have its own set of rules about whether you can keep livestock, whether you can have a shed or a polytunnel or a greenhouse, or how often it has to be, how tidy it has to be all the time. There seem to be different rules for each allotment site.
Yeah, some of the allotment rules sort of remind me of the, I've not experienced them myself, but of the American Homeowners Association sort of things. A friend of mine, she has an allotment down in Cheshire, I believe, and they're not allowed to grow rhubarb because apparently the roots of rhubarb are really strong. I thought, I've never come across a rhubarb that has particularly strong roots, but anyway, they're not allowed to grow rhubarb.
Wow.
Would you believe?
Yeah, I heard of one that isn't allowed to grow sweet corn.
What?
Because apparently badgers really like sweet corn, and so they will come in and totally trash the allotments if someone's growing sweet corn. So they've put a ban on sweet corn. And that's the beautiful idiosyncratic nature of allotment gardening.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very, if you imagine Hobbiton, which I think is very quintessentially English from the Lord of the Rings, they would probably have rules about that on certain patches of land, and that's sort of how I think about it. The kind of the beautiful English allotment is a sort of dream of a lot of people, and so here in the UK, believe it or not, there are lists 5 to 7 years long in order for somebody to get onto an allotment. Have you heard of this, Liz?
I have. I've heard conversely, some allotments have got spaces and you can get one straight away. So I think it reflects obviously the housing around it, the area, and the demographics.
Yeah, absolutely. The allotment that's just down the road from me has literally just been shut down, and they've completely mothballed it because the local sort of housing association decided that they were going to do something else, and they just sort of shut the doors. But the big issue with allotments is, a lot of the time, I think, because allotments are such a British thing, people think of allotments as the only way that they can grow food, which is just not true. In the UK, people always tell me, I'm going to start growing food, I'm on a list for an allotment, and I sort of think, well, great, but that could be 5 years down the road. And one thing that one of my sort of favourite YouTubers that I quite like to watch, Jess Sowers, often says is, make your waiting room your classroom. Wherever you are now, you can be growing. So, even when I was in my flat, living with absolutely no land at all, I thought, well, I'd quite like to grow some tropical edibles from James Wong's Homegrown Revolution book that have to be grown indoors. I don't have the money for those tropical edibles, and I still don't have the money for those tropical edibles, but I'm going to teach myself how to grow tropical plants. And so I managed to find on Facebook someone local who had a whole bunch of tropical plants that she was giving away for £1 each. And so so I scratched together, and they weren't the most amazing, it was like a Monstera plant. Well, actually, I got that one from Aldi for £5. And then, some snake plants and some aloe veras and some, spider plants. All these sorts of things. And I sort of cobbled them together and popped them on my bathroom window and just sort of taught myself through them how to grow indoor plants and how to keep indoor plants happy, because that was just never something I was interested in. But obviously, I wasn't going to waste 20 odd quid on a pineapple that would then keel over and die.
And houseplants are having a massive revival at the moment, aren't they?
They really are. In fact, I've been mildly disappointed by the fact that James Wong's Instagram is mainly houseplants now, because I loved his books on edibles. I really, really loved them. So that was sort of how I made my waiting room my classroom. But so many people, right? My aha moment was when just before I was made homeless, I had a very brief job as a delivery driver for Amazon. Terrible job, don't recommend it. But as one of my rounds, I got sent to one of the grimmest housing estates in the nearby city. And it was this little cul-de-sac that I swear to God, even with my background, even with all of the, personal protective training that I'd been given, I was convinced I was going to get stabbed or that my car was going to get robbed. It was terrifying. But when I looked around that council cul-de-sac, every single one of them had a little front garden, and they all had a half decent sized back garden. And, like I said about that aha moment that I had earlier, that was part of it, because I thought, I'd seen these studies about how better nutrition leads to better attention at schools, which leads to better, academic grades, and then leads to better jobs and blah, 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 and that's how you help people get out of poverty. And then I thought, there's this ground that if people did something with it, they could at least, have a salad a week or something, and that might help with the nutrition and with food costs. And it sort of spiraled, and then, the food not lawns, like you were just saying about, movement, I kind of became aware of. And I thought, gosh, most people have at least a front garden, if not a back garden, and it might be tiny, but it's enough to grow something. I worked out that in a metre by metre space, if you buy 2 bags of salad, the pre-washed stuff that turns to slime within a couple of days of opening it, if you buy 2 bags of salad from Aldi, so not Waitrose, not Sainsbury's, Aldi, per week for your family, and you grow a metre by metre bed of greens, cut and come again greens, even if it's something expensive or more expensive, like the single bed Insta garden, where everything's kind of been put together for you, you will recoup the cost of buying those greens within a year, just from growing that metre by metre space. And that really...
And metre by metre is not huge. That can be done on a balcony, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. Even in, little windowsill boxes. When I was at uni, I used to do that all the time. I'd grow microgreens on the windowsill, and then small salads. As long as you don't have a windowsill above a radiator, or if you can turn the radiator off. That's the biggest issue with growing your own indoors, is radiators. The amount of... Or just shutting the curtains and leaving your seedlings on the outside of the curtains on a frosty night. Yes. That has also caused some issues. But yeah, the amount of floppy salads that I've had from radiators. You just come out and they've just keeled over and shriveled up and... heartbroken I was. Heartbroken. I've still not learnt my lesson though. So that was sort of the aha moment. And so I want to show people that they can grow their own food at home, and then when you haven't got the money to put petrol in your car, your food is right there on your doorstep. When you're tired and you can't be bothered lugging 5 million gallons of water to the allotment that doesn't have water for some bizarre reason, you don't have to. It's in your tap and you just cart it outside and you pour it, even if you don't have a hose, it's not that difficult. I hand water my entire garden here. But it's so much easier to just pop down.
What sort of size, I'm going to just completely interrupt you, what sort of size garden have you got now?
So my back garden is roughly something like 10 metres by 7 metres, not including the decking area.
Okay, so we're talking about 30 feet by 27 feet, something like that.
Yeah. I'm going to say yes. I have no idea what feet.
Or 33 by 27, something like that.
Yeah.
Just doing a quick translation for people who don't, for anybody who doesn't work in metric.
Yeah. So that's my kind of veg patch, as it were. That's my allotment. And then the front garden is 6 metres by 4 metres. And I'm going to be setting that up as more of a perennial garden. So that's kind of the idea, but that's currently just got a big pile of manure on it, and that's about it.
And that's fine.
Exactly. I think it's beautiful. It's full of worms. It's perfect. But yes.
So Victoria, are you going to be sharing the transformation of your garden, particularly your front garden, on your YouTube channel?
I am
as
indeed.
That happens?
Yeah, I'm going to be sharing both of the transformations actually, because over the last year our back garden has undergone a massive transformation, and our front garden will be very soon. And if you want to watch me get lots of splinters from cutting down a hedge, then you should probably subscribe.
Okay, so Victoria's channel can be found at Grow Your Groceries on YouTube. Victoria, thank you so much for joining me today, for talking to us. We will talk again later in the year.
I hope so.
We'll talk harvests and storing food later in the year, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait. It's going to be so good. I'm so excited for this season. I'm absolutely buzzing. I mean, my vegetable collection and my vegetable seed collection has gotten it's gotten ridiculous, but it's going to be so good this season. I can't wait.
I look forward to seeing it as it develops.
Thank you so much, Liz. I've really enjoyed being on here.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
The podcast you've been listening to is a By the Farm production. All rights reserved.